The rain hit Harbor Cafe's windows like static electricity, each drop a small percussion against glass so clean, the weather reflected back double. Inside, the scent of ground coffee and cinnamon hung warm enough to taste. Oak tables lined the narrow space, brass lamps casting pools of amber light across surfaces worn smooth by a decade of elbows and open laptops. The espresso machine hissed its steady rhythm, a small train leaving an honest station. Marcus Hayes wiped down the steam wand with the kind of attention most people reserved for surgical instruments. 40 minutes until close. The towel moved in careful circles, removing milk residue the way he'd been taught thoroughly without drama. His shoulders carried the particular fatigue of a man who'd already worked 8 hours before clocking in here, the kind of tired that settles into bone but doesn't complain. Behind the counter, the clock read 6:42 p.m. Dylan sat at the corner table, math worksheet spread before him like a treaty requiring translation. 8 years old, brown hair falling across his forehead, pencil gripped too tight. The boy had Marcus's jaw, that stubborn angle that suggested he'd inherited more than bone structure. He'd gotten the tendency to shoulder things alone. The door exploded inward. Not opened. Exploded. A woman launched through the entrance as if the street itself had rejected her rain-slick coat, swinging hair escaping what had probably been a professional knot 2 blocks ago. Her eyes swept the cafe with the speed of someone calculating exits, entrances, and the structural integrity of cover. Mascara tracked faint lines down her cheeks. Outside, umbrellas tilted like black satellites hunting for signal. 15 photographers, minimum lenses aimed at the glass like weapons waiting for the right angle. Marcus's hand stilled on the steam wand. Dylan's pencil stopped mid-equation. The woman's gaze locked onto Marcus with the desperation of someone who'd run out of better options 3 minutes ago. Her breathing came shallow, controlled, the way people breathe when panic isn't allowed. Her voice cut through the cafe's warm hum. "Please, pretend you love me for 10 minutes. The words landed with such specific gravity that Marcus found himself cataloging details he hadn't meant to notice. Designer coat, but the hem was torn. Shoes that cost more than his monthly rent, but one heel wobbled. Manicured hands, but the left thumbnail was chewed raw. This was someone who knew how to armor herself and had just discovered the plates didn't cover everything. Marcus set the towel down with deliberate calm. 10 minutes. That's oddly specific. The woman flicked her gaze toward the window where the pack of photographers pressed closer, umbrellas jostling for position. "Because I only need 10 for the wolves to get bored, and because I don't make a habit of lying longer than necessary." From the corner, Dylan's voice piped up with the kind of clarity only children possess. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Marcus gave his son the smile he'd perfected over 2 years of single fatherhood, steady enough to hold a kite in a storm, light enough not to add weight to worry. "Not today, champ." He looked back at the woman. Really looked, this time. Recognition flickered. He'd seen her face on magazine covers in the grocery checkout line, heard her name on the business radio station the morning crew played, while he cleaned commercial HVAC systems on the 40th floor. Elena Cross. CEO of something large enough to have its own acronym. Crosstech Industries, the building where he mopped floors and replaced fluorescent tubes during the graveyard shift. The irony settled like sediment. Marcus glanced at the clock. 6:45 p.m. The framed sign behind the register declared in hand-painted letters, "House policy, no drama, just coffee." He looked at Elena Cross, at the rain caught in her hair, at the photographers multiplying like cells outside, at the way her shoulders held tension like architecture supporting weight. It wasn't designed for, and made a decision that felt less like choice and more like the only response his particular wiring allowed. Okay. Ground rules. Elena's posture shifted, the CEO finding structure even in chaos. "Name them." "No touching, that would make my kid uncomfortable. You follow my lead even if it looks ridiculous. and we stop at 9 minutes and 59 seconds. For the first time since crashing through the door, something like amusement crooked the edge of her mouth. Deal. Marcus stepped into her space with the quiet confidence of someone who'd changed light bulbs on 12-foot ladders without thinking about the drop. He moved with the economy of motion that came from years of maintenance work. Efficient, purposeful, nothing wasted. He walked Elena toward the front window where the flashes could get a generous frame, each step choreographed by instinct rather than plan. Dylan watched from his table, eyes sharp with the kind of observation children develop when they've had to become fluent in adult tension. Marcus caught his son's gaze and gave a small nod. The boy lifted his math book like a clapperboard and announced, voice carrying just enough action. Marcus reached for a cappuccino tray from the counter, the metal shield gleaming under the cafe lights. He turned, placing himself between Elena and the glass. Outside, someone shouted her name. Another voice called something that wasn't her name at all, just noise shaped like accusation. Elena's shoulders tensed beneath her coat, then settled. The shift was minute, but Marcus felt it the moment someone decides to trust a stranger with something they can't afford to lose. He angled the tray so reflections ghosted over the camera lenses, fracturing their line of sight. To anyone outside, the geometry would read as intimacy. A man leaning in with something to say that couldn't wait. A woman listening, like the words mattered more than the weather. Elena murmured, voice low enough that only Marcus could hear. "You're very good at this." Marcus's reply came without hesitation. "I mop floors and troubleshoot HVAC systems. In trouble." He pointed toward the window with his chin. "Tilt your head, like you just heard a better story than the one they're selling." She did. The gesture softened, her jaw melted the boardroom steel into something fiercely human. The cameras outside went wild, shutters clicking like insects, desperate for light. Marcus lifted a cup he'd poured earlier, heart-shaped foam still perfect, despite the chaos, and pressed it into her hand. "For the photograph you didn't ask for." Her laughter came soft, the kind that runs under a door and changes the temperature of the room beyond. "Do you hand out props to all your pretend girlfriends?" "Only the one I'm staying for 9 more minutes." Elena almost spilled the foam heart. From the corner, Dylan called out with the precision of a stage manager who'd studied the script, "He's at the door!" Marcus glanced. A photographer had pushed the cafe entrance open an inch, testing boundaries, the way water tests for cracks. Marcus moved before the hinge could squeal, smooth as tide. The tray came up, catching the door with the cool clang of polite steel. His voice stayed even temperature without error, house policy. The photographer groaned, rain dripping from his jacket in accusatory streams. "Come on, man, she's public interest." Elena stepped to Marcus's side, voice clear enough to carry, but controlled enough to land, "I'm a human being. There's a difference." The door eased shut. Outside, the wall of umbrellas rippled in irritation, then resettled like crows adjusting on a wire. Inside, time clicked forward. 2 minutes down. Marcus gestured toward a booth by the window, but set back far enough to avoid the main camera sweep. "Sit. If they want a show, let's make one that doesn't cost your soul." Elena slid into the seat coat, settling around her like armor that had finally agreed to rest. Marcus set another cup down for show empty, but the gesture mattered more than the contents. Then, without breaking rhythm, he knelt and tugged the napkin dispenser forward, creating a humble barricade just tall enough to keep prying lenses from reading her phone screen if she needed to text. It was a janitor's trick. Solve the problem people don't know they have. Elena watched him work, and the words slipped out almost to herself. "I hire consultants for crisis management. Turns out I needed a barista." Marcus straightened, a small smile flickering at the corner of his mouth. "Don't be offended, but I'm off the clock in 20 minutes. After that, I'm strictly a dad." "I'm not offended." She paused, something shifting behind her eyes. "I'm relieved." 5 minutes. The cafe lights hummed their steady frequency. The rain grew thoughtful, transitioning from assault to accompaniment. Marcus could feel the room calibrating around them. Regulars pretended not to stare. A pair of college kids whispered behind laptop screens. The owner, Mrs. Patterson's 67 gray bun hands that had poured 10,000 cups without complaint, polished the same glass for an unnecessary length of time. Elena took a careful sip, then set the cup down as if it were a fragile truth. They called me reckless on cable this morning. The lie was more elegant than the correction will ever be. Marcus leaned against the booth across from her, maintaining easy distance. There's a trick to lies. They burn quick and bright. Truth isn't much for fireworks. It just stays. That's supposed to comfort me. No, Marcus said, small smile returning. It's supposed to anchor you. She looked at him then. Really looked. Light skimmed his face, catching the clean stubble, the dimple that appeared only when he wasn't performing for anyone. He didn't have predator's eyes or savior's posture. He had the stance of someone who'd learned to ask a mess what it wanted to become, then helped it get there. Dylan padded over in sneakers that squeaked against the floor, each step announcing his approach. Time check, he announced with the gravity of someone managing nuclear codes. We're at 7 minutes. Also, I finished the fractions. Show me. Marcus slid over to make room. He put a hand lightly on Dylan's shoulder, never owning, always assuring. Elena watched the gesture with an attention she usually reserved for quarterly reports. She'd seen men sign billion-dollar partnerships with less reverence than this father gave a homework sheet. You're good with him. The words escaped, before Elena could dress them in professional distance. You make hard things look like everyday things, Marcus answered without looking up from Dylan's worksheet. That's the job. Only job I ever wanted to be great at. Something moved behind Elena's eyes. There it was. The bruise the rumors couldn't name. She caught it fast the way a person snatches a glass before it falls and redirected. She glanced at the window. The cameras were still there, but some had wandered off in search of louder storms. The rain thinned to mist. Somewhere a siren rode a thin line across the blocks. 8 minutes. What's your name? Elena asked suddenly, voice shifting to something less guarded. Besides, guy who blocks cameras with a coffee tray. Marcus Hayes. He nodded toward Dylan. That's Dylan. I'm Elena. She paused. I know. Dylan replied with the seriousness of a small judge presiding over important matters. My grandma watches you on the business channel. She yells at the TV when the men interrupt. Elena's laugh landed warmer this time, breaking through whatever remained of her armor. Tell your grandma I'm fine. I've been interrupted by experts. She'll like that, Dylan said, satisfied with the exchange. He returned to his table homework, complete the world restored to acceptable order. Marcus straightened. Mission complete. So how do you want to exit this scene? Elena thought for a beat, then surprised both of them. I'll walk out the back. They'll forget me when dinner starts and the city turns its face to neon. But could you stand in the doorway with the tray until I'm out of the alley? I don't want them getting bold. Marcus picked up the tray, spun it once like a coin catching light. Bold men love a mirror. He tipped his head toward the glass. Ready, ready. She rose, coat instinct tugging her shoulders back into the precise geometry of command. But as she reached the threshold between cafe and corridor, she turned. Marcus? Yeah. You didn't ask why I needed this. Marcus met her gaze without hesitation. I didn't need the story to do the decent thing. Dignity doesn't ask for a spotlight. It brings its own light. Her throat closed around whatever reply had been forming. The kindness wasn't noisy. It made space. It made weather. It made a person want to stand differently inside their name. They moved. Marcus first tray up courteous shield. Elena, close behind steps, measured chin level. Dylan watched from the booth, counting under his breath, like a stage manager tracking cues. 9:30, 9:40, 9:50. They cut through the back corridor, air thick with cinnamon and the ghost of rain from coats that had passed through earlier. At the exit, Marcus nudged the door with his shoulder, giving the alley a weather report. Clear enough. Elena slipped into the gray light. The downpour had softened to drifting mist. Somewhere a bus swept a puddle into temporary flight. She paused at the threshold, turned. Thank you. Not the perfunctory kind. This one carried weight. For not making it a transaction. 10 minutes are up. Marcus said it gently, like offering an exit that didn't require apology. You don't owe me anything. Elena lifted her chin in what looked like a vow. Then here's what I owe myself to walk out of here with my head still attached to my heart. She tucked a business card onto the community bulletin board by the door, then thought better of it and slid it face down onto Dylan's math book instead. If the world gets noisy again, call. I can return a favor. We're good. Marcus said it plainly, but his eyes acknowledged the language of lifelines. She hesitated. In that 2-second silence, they shook hands without touching. Then Elena stepped into the rain, collected herself like a headline rewritten, and vanished toward the corner where taillights blurred into the evening's wet palette. Marcus stood in the doorway until the alley turned back into an ordinary slice of city. He lowered the tray. The cafe exhaled. Dylan trotted up solemn as ever. Was she a princess? No. Marcus grinned despite himself. She's the kind of person who builds the castle and negotiates for better sidewalks. Dylan nodded, satisfied with the taxonomy. Cool. Marcus ruffled his son's hair, returned to the machine, and steamed milk that sounded like a small departure from a station that kept its promises. He wiped the counter-set cups in neat rows, turned the open sign to closed with the ceremony the moment deserved. Outside, the umbrellas were gone. Rain just rained. The business card lay face down on the table, a small white island in the geography of their evening. Marcus picked it up. Heavy stock embossed letters. Elena Cross, Chief Executive Officer, Cross Tech Industries. A direct number beneath, and in quick, decisive strokes, an unexpectedly tiny drawn heart that looked like a coffee bean. Marcus didn't pocket it. He tucked it under the register where lost things waited to be claimed. Ready for home, kiddo. Dylan shouldered his backpack, the weight of fractions and weather. Can we make hot cocoa? Always. When they stepped into the rinsed evening, father and son walking the kind of pace the city overlooks until it needs saving. The storm light shifted to amber. Somewhere downtown, a newsroom slotted a headline. In the photo that would run a coffee tray glinted like a makeshift shield. Tomorrow morning, in a glass tower with a skyline view, Elena Cross would push through the lobby and discover that her 10-minute boyfriend mopped the floors of her empire, and neither of them would pretend it meant nothing. The executive suite on the 42nd floor of Crosstech Tower wore morning light like expensive tailoring. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed Portland in clean geometric slices, Bridges River, the West Hills rising green, even in November. The conference table could seat 16 but currently held 3, Elena at the head. Rachel Kim at her right hand with a tablet glowing and 1 empty chair waiting for variables. Rachel tapped her pen once against the glass surface, the soft click echoing with the authority of a gavel. Morning sun climbed the skyline beyond them, painting everything in angles that looked composed, as if the city had ironed its shirt for the meeting. Elena stood at the head of the table with stillness that suggested she knew exactly how to quiet a room without raising her voice. On the screen behind her, a presentation deck waited 3 slides, no theatrics. Across the table, 2 board members attended via video conference, a legal associate flipped through bound documents, and the empty chair held the space reserved for outcomes not yet determined. Agenda, Rachel said, voice carrying the efficiency of someone who'd learned to make syllables count. Stabilize optics ahead of the quarterly meeting. Decide on narrative we can live with. Choose the hard way now or the impossible way later. Elena exhaled through her nose. Hard way. Always. The door opened. Marcus stepped in hair damp from the walk up from the parking garage shirt without the cafe apron, but carrying the same careful posture. The tallest kid in class who'd learned never to loom. He clocked the polished floor. The glass walls, the insulated quiet of this cathedral built from capital, and found the empty chair without being told. Rachel rose to shake his hand, the gesture formal but warm. Mr. Hayes, thank you for coming on short notice. Marcus nodded once. I come cheap, but I don't come careless. Elena's mouth twitched. Rachel's eyes warmed a fraction. They could work with that. Rachel clicked the remote. The slide shifted to a collage of headlines, some false, some lazy, all loud. Our analysts say the market isn't panicking, but the chatter is corrosive. You know the rules of the modern game. If we don't tell the story, someone sells us theirs. Elena folded her hands. A silver ring, unadorned and stern, caught the light. I want a story without varnish. One that says I'm not auditioning for sainthood, I'm leading a company on time above board. Marcus glanced at the window where the city's angles stacked like truths you could stand on. So, why am I here? Rachel looked to Elena. Elena didn't flinch. Because yesterday in a room that smelled like cinnamon and rain, you helped me keep my head attached to my heart. And because the photos are out there now. I didn't plan the rumor, but I can steer the narrative. For 3 weeks we appear as a couple at a handful of public events. We act like we're dating. We act like human beings. No lies about who you are. No charade that steps on your dignity. Marcus listened the way a father listens when Weather is thinking about changing lanes. Why 3 weeks? Because that carries us through the shareholder meeting, Rachel answered, voice steady. Because it's honest to the arc of news cycles. And because if this goes longer, it becomes a campaign. We're not running for anything. Marcus leaned back. Ground rules. Elena slid a slim folder across the table. Inside pages that didn't apologize for being paper. We drafted terms, no expensive gifts, no physical contact beyond what we mutually agree to in the moment. Never in front of Dylan without his comfort. No intrusion into your private life. I will not use you as a prop. And one more, veto power on everything that touches my son. Marcus said it like declaring coordinates. If a camera angle catches him, if a schedule shift interferes with his routine, if a story threatens to make him content, my no is the end of the sentence. Elena met his gaze without blinking. Done. Rachel added, already typing, we'll develop a parallel plan to protect Dylan's privacy. Separate from PR that comes under safety, not optics. Marcus nodded once. He didn't say thank you. The acknowledgement lived in how his shoulders lowered by a single degree. What's the fee? Elena asked businesslike as if requesting door measurements for a new hinge. Marcus's jaw worked, then stilled. I need a lawyer, not a cousin who prints forms at cost, a real one. There's a custody review coming. The other party wants more weekends. I want what's best for my boy. That costs retainer money I don't have. Elena didn't blink. We'll set transparent payment that reflects work, not power dynamics. It will go to your counsel directly, not through me. Rachel was already typing. Third-party trust. Clean line. Full compliance. Marcus half smiled. You're very good at making decent things boring. That's the only way decent things stay, Rachel said, returning the expression. Elena turned a page in the folder. Appearances. We start with the ESG Fund Launch Gala tonight. It's not our event, we're only a host partner, so the room will be mixed. Mixed? How? Marcus asked. Old money. New money. A few true believers. A few wolves in priest collars, Rachel said. Smile without surrender. Speak little, but when you do say something that fits on a post-it, cameras like sentences that can live alone. Marcus's lips quirked. You have a whole theology for this. I have a spine, Rachel said mildly, and a job I can do without rinsing my conscience with bleach. They worked through specifics. No social media posts from Marcus, no off-the-record drinks with reporters, a standing signal if either needed to cut an interaction shorthand over the coffee cup, a nothing gesture that meant everything. Elena would loop security and facilities so Marcus wouldn't get hassled at entrances. His badge would clear him and Dylan to public floors during daytime hours without wasted energy at reception desks. The legal associate laid out consent language like a neat row of wrenches. Marcus read every line. He traced the clauses with the steady attention of someone who'd fixed machines that couldn't afford to fail. Questions, Elena asked when silence settled. 2, Marcus said. The air tightened around the table. What do I call you when we're off camera? Elena, not Miss Cross. Titles have their place. They don't have to live in the kitchen. And the second, the room leaned in without moving. Who's going to hate this the most? Rachel flicked to her final slide. A grayscale headshot appeared, smile that didn't reach either eye. Graham Sterling, activist investor. He's not our enemy, he's a misaligned incentive. He believes your work ethic is smokescreen for soft edges, and he's betting he can pressure you out if he makes enough noise. Our job isn't to fight him in public, it's to show our homework and let the numbers carry their own megaphone. Marcus considered the photo the way he'd consider a blueprint with a flaw he couldn't quite locate. He looks like a man who thinks a broom only goes one direction. Elena's voice found warmth without losing steel. Let me worry about Graham. And who worries about you? Marcus asked before he could swallow it. Rachel's gaze slid sideways, surprised, then not. Elena didn't look away. I do. And for 3 weeks, apparently, you do. A small smile nudged the corner of Marcus's mouth. Then let's write it down. They signed. Ink scratched compact promises on heavy paper. It wasn't romance. It was respect bound in clauses that protected the softest things either of them owned. Time with a child, time with a company, built bolt by bolt. When they finished, Elena capped the pen like closing a door softly. After hours, we'll meet at the cafe. Not for cameras to rehearse exits and entrances so we don't step on each other's toes tonight. If you can drink coffee at this hour, Marcus said. I can drink an apology if it's warm, she returned. Rachel gathered papers. I'll circulate badges and briefing notes. I want both of you to pick a single sentence you can say if cornered something that won't feed the beast. She stood. Mine is, we're focusing on the work. Not original as a doorknob, but it opens rooms. Marcus thought a moment. How about, we keep our promises where the cameras aren't? Rachel paused, nodded. That's clean. Elena tilted her head eyes on Marcus rather than the skyline. And mine, we treat people like they're not disposable. The boardroom felt less like a stage, more like a bench in a quiet station waiting for a train they'd chosen together. They broke. In the elevator, the mirror gave back 3 different wars and 1 new language, how to be simple together in a complicated place. At the lobby, Elena's assistant offered a garment bag and a schedule printed like a hymn. See you at the cafe, Elena said to Marcus, voice low enough to be theirs alone. After the dinner rush. We'll practice. We won't perform. Marcus nodded. I'll bring the cup. You bring the spine. I won't leave home without it. The cafe, after peak hours, wore the gentleness of a room exhaling. Chairs tucked themselves in. The bell over the door chimed like a polite throat clearing. Marcus stood behind the counter, sleeves rolled espresso machine sounding like rain on a tin roof. When Elena walked in dark dress garment bag over her shoulder, hair loose in a way that made her look less like a headline and more like someone who'd decided to stop running, he raised a hand in greeting. The way you greet a neighbor, not a news cycle. Stage marks, he said, sliding 2 coasters onto the floor like taped X's. This one keeps you angled away from the worst glare. This one keeps me from blocking your face with the tray if I have to block the camera. She set the garment bag down, stepped onto her mark. What do we do if someone asks for our origin story? We tell the truth without the obituary, Marcus said. You came in out of the rain. I handed you a cup. We were kind. Elena repeated it softly, testing the grain of the sentence. We were kind. He poured her a small latte. Nothing photogenic. Everything honest. There's another part to my fee. She looked up. You don't say sorry for needing help. You don't weaponize humility to make other people comfortable. Elena's smile tilted. You negotiate like a union and a chaplain had a son. Best I can do, he said. Your term, she said, matching his steadiness, is that you tell me if I cross a line. I'm good at running into burning buildings as long as they're made of paperwork. Sometimes I forget humans can catch. Deal. They shook on it, hands firm. No theater. The bell chimed. Dylan struggled through the door with a backpack the size of bold decision. We are, Marcus said. You're the stage manager. When I say curtain, you check the alley and the front window. Tell me if we're clear. Dylan saluted. Elena crouched to his height. You're the most important person here. He considered this gravely. I accept. They ran the beats once, twice, entrance, pivot, greet, exit, until the choreography felt like decency disguised as habit. At the end, Elena slipped into the restroom with her garment bag and emerged the way a lighthouse does. Not brighter, just more precise. Ready? Marcus asked. Elena looked at them both, father polishing a coffee shield boy with a backpack full of math and courage, and said what felt true. Ready. Dylan peered through the glass, gave a solemn thumbs up. Curtain. They stepped into the evening they'd chosen toward a ballroom where marble waited to test whether people in good shoes could still stand for something. The waterfront hotel lobby gleamed like ambition polished to a mirror shine. Chandeliers scattered light across silk and sharp tuxedos. The ESG Fund launch gala wasn't just an event. It was theater of influence, and Elena Cross walked into it with Marcus Hayes at her side, their pace in step like they'd rehearsed the rhythm without discussing tempo. Marcus's suit was borrowed but fit him like he'd earned it through posture alone. Elena's emerald dress caught light like a blade waiting to be noticed. Together they looked like a headline that had stopped running long enough to breathe. Then it happened. Half a step into the lobby, Elena's right heel caught on the carpet edge. The faintest snap, leather and metal giving way under pressure, was lost beneath the string quartet, but she felt it, an unmistakable shift in the geometry of standing. Marcus's hand shot out, steadying her elbow before anyone could register the wobble. His voice came low, calm as diagnostic equipment. Don't look down. Smile. Elena's jaw tightened. It's broken. Not tonight, it isn't. He guided her with the precision of a dance partner to a small recess along the wall just outside the main camera sweep. Hold here, 2 minutes. From somewhere between bar tray memory and instinct, Marcus produced a slim black pouch from his inside jacket pocket. Elena blinked. You carry tools to a gala. You carry armor. He knelt to examine the damaged fingers already assessing before his eyes confirmed. I carry repairs. The gash in the heel was clean. The metal pin bent just enough to destabilize everything above it. Marcus's fingers moved with the steady confidence of someone who'd solved worse problems with less. He retrieved a safety pin and medical tape from the pouch items that had no business being at a fundraiser, but made perfect sense in the hands of someone who understood that preparedness wasn't paranoia, just professional courtesy toward chaos. He glanced up. Don't ask why I have this. Some things about maintenance engineers are classified exactly. Marcus secured the heel in quick, practiced movements, the kind of efficiency that came from fixing things that mattered under time pressure. Value isn't about price tags. It's about whether it holds when it matters. She looked down at him, not as the CEO surveying a problem to be delegated, but as a woman seeing someone who refused to let her falter in a room designed to measure stumbles. Marcus rose smoothly, offered his arm with the quiet certainty of someone who'd just rewritten the script. Walk like you own the building, not just the stock. She did. The repaired heel clicked against marble as if nothing had happened. Cameras caught the shimmer of her gown, the unshaken poise, and the man beside her who looked like he belonged there simply because he'd decided not to be small. Near the entrance to the ballroom, a familiar smirk waited. Graham's sterling tuxedo sharp enough to draw blood. He stepped forward just as Elena reached the top of the stairs, positioning himself like a toll booth on a road that should have been free. Evening, Elena. Voice laced with mock courtesy, the kind that pretended civility while sharpening knives. I almost didn't recognize you with help. Marcus didn't break stride. Careful. You almost sound impressed. Graham's eyes narrowed, but Elena's smile was flawless, the kind forged in boardrooms where showing teeth meant different things to different predators. Graham, I hope you'll enjoy the speeches tonight. I hear integrity is making a rare appearance. A flash from a nearby camera froze the moment. Her poised him bristling Marcus at her side like quiet punctuation that made the sentence land. Inside, the gala swelled with chatter. Waiters glided by with champagne balanced on trays that caught light like liquid gold. Marcus kept a soft buffer between Elena and the crowd, intercepting overzealous handshakes with the diplomatic grace of someone who understood that protection didn't always look like confrontation. They stopped at a circle of investors discussing sustainable building practices. Elena engaged precise and warm, the combination that had built her reputation before the rumors tried to burn it down while Marcus stood just behind her shoulder. Present, but not intrusive. There if needed, invisible if not. One of the older investors eyed Marcus with the assessment of someone used to measuring worth by resume. And what's your area of expertise? Marcus didn't flinch. Maintenance. I make sure things built to last actually last. The man chuckled, the sound carrying genuine appreciation. You'd be surprised how rare that is in our world. I'm learning, Marcus said, his gaze drifting back to Elena, that it's rare everywhere. Elena caught the line. Her lips curved. She excused herself from the circle, motioning for Marcus to follow. That was good, she murmured as they moved toward the perimeter. I wasn't performing, Marcus replied. I was telling the truth. The rest of the evening played out like a script they hadn't rehearsed but somehow knew by heart. When Elena gave a short toast about ethical growth, Marcus stood just inside the frame, not smiling for the cameras, but listening. Really listening, like the words were blueprints worth following. They made it through without another slip until they reached the valet station outside. Rain had returned, dotting the pavement with silver coins. Marcus opened the car door for Elena, and in the reflection of the black sedan, they both saw it, her repaired heel still holding strong. She looked up at him. You saved me from a very public fall. Marcus shook his head. You saved yourself. I just gave you a way to keep walking. The driver pulled away from the curb. Elena glanced out the window at the flashing lights fading behind them, like stars burning out in reverse. Marcus sat beside her, gaze on the rain-slick streets that reflected the city back to itself. What you did tonight, Elena began, then stopped, started again. It's not something I can put in a contract. That's fine, Marcus said quietly. The best work doesn't make it into contracts. Her phone buzzed in her clutch. A headline was already circulating: Elena Cross stuns at ESG gala with mystery partner. Who is he? She could see the photo, her poised mid-step Marcus just behind arm, ready if she needed him. It was better than any staged image her PR team could buy. But as the car rolled into the night, Elena saw a new notification. A message from Rachel marked urgent. "We've got a problem. Anonymous tip. CPS report on Marcus just hit my desk." Elena's chest tightened. Marcus sat beside her, unaware, his gaze still on the rain that blurred the streets into watercolor. "Something wrong?" he asked, picking up on the shift before she could mask it. She forced her voice steady. Professional, a shield she'd learned to raise when the ground started shaking. "We'll talk tomorrow." Outside, the city lights blurred in the glass as if the night itself knew the next chapter wouldn't be all chandeliers and applause. The knock wasn't loud, but it carried weight. 3 measured taps, each one announcing paperwork and procedure. Marcus opened the apartment door to find a woman in a navy blazer holding a clipboard, her ID clipped high and visible where it couldn't be missed or questioned. Child Protective Services. Behind her, the hallway smelled faintly of floor wax and winter coats that had seen better seasons. Marcus's hand tightened on the doorknob, not from fear, but from the sudden understanding that someone had weaponized bureaucracy. "Mr. Hayes." "That's me." His voice stayed calm, but grip on the door told a different story. "I'm Angela Rui. I'm here for a scheduled home welfare check." Marcus's eyes flicked to the wall clock. He'd known this visit was coming. The voicemail last night had been professional, procedural, final. He just hadn't expected it to arrive with the echo of last night's headlines still ringing in his skull. From the kitchen table, Dylan looked up from his half-built paper robot. "Dad, who is it?" Before Marcus could answer, another knock sounded lighter, familiar in its cadence. Elena stood at the door with a takeout bag, hair loose around her shoulders, rain still caught in the fabric of her coat. "Dinner delivery." Then she caught sight of the badge in Angela's hand. Her smile paused, but didn't falter, adjusting to new information the way good executives do, quickly, without panic. "Come in," Marcus said to Angela, stepping aside. He looked at Elena. "You too." The apartment was modest in the way that spoke of intentional care rather than neglect. 2 bedrooms, books stacked neatly along one wall, organized by size and subject, a rug that had seen years of homework sprawls but was clean and whole. The faint scent of cocoa lingered in the air, last night's ritual, this morning's comfort. Marcus's evenings were visible in every detail. Shoes lined by the door in descending order of size. Laundry folded in baskets waiting for the dresser. A small corkboard with Dylan's spelling tests pinned in tidy rows, each one marked with a gold star that Marcus had added himself, because the teacher's red ink wasn't enough celebration for effort. Angela glanced around with the practiced eye of someone trained to see what people tried to hide. "I'll need to see where Dylan sleeps, the kitchen, any medications." "We'll start with his room," Marcus said. As they walked down the short hallway, Elena lingered back, eyes scanning not in judgment, but in quiet inventory. She noticed the worn comic books on Dylan's nightstand edges, soft from repeated reading. The robot parts laid out on his desk with the precision of a young engineer who'd learned that order mattered. No mess shoved in corners, no chaos disguised as charm. Angela took notes, checked smoke detectors with a small device from her bag, asked routine questions in the flat tone of someone who'd asked them 1,000 times. "Has there been any change in your work schedule? How often is Dylan left unsupervised?" Marcus answered without edge, each response carrying the weight of truth that didn't need decoration. "Evening shifts, never without supervision. If I can't be here, he's with my sister Sarah or my neighbor Mrs. Duffy, both cleared last year." Angela nodded, making marks that would become data points in a file somewhere. "School records." Marcus handed her a folder already on the counter, Report cards, attendance logs, a note from Dylan's teacher on official letterhead praising his curiosity and kindness. Olivia caught the smallest shift in Angela's expression. Respect for preparation, maybe. Or recognition that Marcus wasn't scrambling. He'd been ready for this before the knock came. Angela flipped through the file with the efficiency of someone sorting mail. Dylan's doing well academically. No concerns noted. Elena stayed quiet, watching Marcus's posture. Upright, but not defensive. He wasn't performing for her or for Angela. This was just who he was when stakes were high, someone who met challenges by being prepared rather than lucky. Angela moved to the kitchen. Food storage is adequate. Appliances functional. No safety hazards observed. She made final notes, pen scratching against paper, with the sound of conclusions being drawn. Mr. Hayes' this visit was prompted by an anonymous concern. It's routine, but we will conduct a follow-up in 2 weeks. Marcus didn't ask who filed the report. He didn't need to. The timing told him everything about motive, even if it said nothing about identity. You'll find the same thing then, he said evenly. Angela gathered her clipboard, tucked her pen away with the finality of someone closing a chapter. She turned to Dylan, who'd been watching from the kitchen table with the wide-eyed attention of someone learning that the world had more rules than he'd previously understood. You have a good dad, kid. Dylan grinned, the expression breaking through the tension like sun through storm clouds. I know. When the door closed behind her, the apartment felt smaller, the quiet heavier. Marcus stood for a moment just breathing, then looked at Elena. You didn't have to see that. I'm glad I did. He exhaled, leaning against the counter like it was the only thing keeping gravity in check. Some people hear CPS and think it means I'm failing. It doesn't. It means the system checks when someone whispers in the dark. Elena set the takeout bag down with deliberate care. Then let me be clear. I don't think you're failing. I think someone is trying to weaponize procedure against you. Marcus's jaw tightened, the muscle working beneath skin. Yeah, and they're dragging my kid into it. Not if I can help it. He shook his head, but it wasn't refusal, more like disbelief that someone with her resources would spend them on his problems. Elena, no. Listen. She cut in, voice steady as a plumb line. I'm not here to bulldoze into your fight, but I can connect you with a family attorney who knows CPS procedure cold. You don't have to use them, but I want you to have the option. Marcus studied her for a beat, looking for the angle, the transaction, the place where generosity became leverage. He didn't find it. You always have a contingency plan ready. Always, she said. It's how I keep standing. Something in his shoulders eased just enough to let the moment breathe. I'll take the number. Doesn't mean I'm asking you to fight my battles. Elena's smile was faint but real, carrying warmth without pity. Marcus, the battles worth fighting rarely belong to just one person. They sat down to dinner, takeout containers between them, Dylan chattering about his robot design with the enthusiasm of someone who'd decided the earlier tension was resolved and could therefore be safely ignored. Elena listened, asked questions, laughed at the right moments with genuine delight rather than performance. Marcus caught her watching Dylan with the kind of focus she usually reserved for negotiations that would make or break quarters. Not studying, seeing. When Dylan went to wash up for bed, Marcus leaned back in his chair. You know you walked in here tonight right as they showed up. Timing's a skill, Elena said. Or fate. Elena didn't answer that. Instead, she said, voice quiet enough to be a confession. 2 weeks until the follow-up. That's enough time to make sure whoever's behind this realizes they can't scare you out of being his father. Marcus's eyes held hers. They can try. They'll lose. The conversation shifted to logistics after that. Dylan's school schedule, Marcus's shifts, the next public appearance on the calendar. But underneath it all ran a new current, something that couldn't be written into contracts or measured in 3-week increments. Trust built not in boardrooms or gala speeches, but in the unglamorous space of a kitchen table after the door closes on a government check-in. Later, as Elena left, she paused at the doorway. "Marcus." "Yeah, you didn't ask why I came tonight." He thought about it, then gave her what felt true. Didn't need to. Some people show up for headlines. Others show up for the quiet parts. Elena's lips curved, but her eyes softened in a way that made the smile mean more. "Good night, Marcus." When the door shut, Marcus looked at the neat row of papers still on the counter. Dylan's homework, Angela's business card, the schedule for next week. The visit hadn't shaken him, but it had reminded him that the world had teeth and that some people would stand beside you when it decided to bite. In another part of the city, Rachel Kim closed her laptop with a sharp snap. On her screen, an internal email thread scrolled into memory, one that traced the CPS tip to a name she knew all too well. An assistant on Graham Sterling's payroll routed through enough proxies to suggest guilt without quite proving conspiracy. She reached for her phone. Tomorrow there would be calls to make, and this time she wouldn't be polite. The morning light through Rachel's office window cut sharp angles across her desk. She'd been awake since 4, tracing digital breadcrumbs through proxy servers and burner accounts, following the kind of trail people left when they thought themselves clever rather than careful. The private investigator she'd hired, a former FBI analyst who charged by the insight rather than the hour, had delivered results at 2 a.m. with the subject line, "Found your rat." Elena arrived at 7, coffee in hand, face showing the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent the night running scenarios instead of sleeping. "Tell me you have something." Rachel turned her laptop around. Email thread. Anonymous tip to CPS originated from a burner account routed through a VPN, but the payment for the VPN service traces back to a paralegal firm that exclusively serves Graham Sterling's portfolio companies. Elena leaned in, scanning the documentation with the speed of someone who'd learned to read evidence the way most people read headlines. This proves proximity, not causation. Keep reading. 3 screens down, a bank transfer. $500 from an LLC registered to Graham's cousin sent to the paralegal with a memo line that read, "Research Services." "Still circumstantial," Elena said, but her voice had changed texture, less doubt, more calculation. "Then there's this." Rachel clicked to an audio file. Building security footage caught this in the parking garage 2 days before the CPS filing. Graham talking to his chief of staff. "Audio's rough, but our guy cleaned it up." She pressed play. Graham's voice came through distorted but intelligible. "If CPS spooks him enough, Cross will fold the PR stunt. Simple pressure, clean hands. I don't care about the kid. I care about removing her emotional leverage." Elena's hand tightened on the desk edge, knuckles going white in a way that suggested the wood should be grateful it was solid. "Send that to legal. Chain of custody documentation. Every timestamp, every proxy, every dollar. I want it airtight." "Already done," Rachel said. "But if we leak now, he'll lawyer up, claim it's doctored, turn it into he said, she said." Elena straightened, mind already 3 moves ahead on a board most people couldn't see. "We don't leak. We corner him where he can't run. Force him to either confess or commit to a lie we can prove false." "When and where?" "Investor conference next Thursday. Loading dock exit at 6 p.m. He always leaves alone to take calls away from cameras." Elena's eyes held the cold clarity of someone who'd stopped being surprised by cruelty and started documenting it. "I want him to see me when he realizes he's lost." The presentation room on Crosstech's 30th floor looked designed to impress even the most jaded investor. Glass walls framed the city skyline in sections like the world beyond, was art curated for their appreciation. Rows of leather chairs, a projector that cost more than Marcus's annual salary, and an air conditioning system he'd personally serviced last month cold enough to keep people alert, but not uncomfortable. Elena stood at the head of the conference table, every inch the CEO. Marcus sat 3 rows back, not as part of the team, but as the boyfriend, a presence meant to humanize her in a room of sharp suits and sharper questions. From his seat, Marcus could see Dylan's handwriting on the corner of Elena's notes. A tiny doodle of a coffee cup with the words, "Good luck," in crayon that hadn't quite stayed inside the lines. It was the kind of detail no one else would notice, but Marcus held on to it like an anchor in water that kept getting deeper. Elena began, voice carrying the authority of someone who'd earned her position through results rather than inheritance. Thank you for joining us to discuss the Crosstech Tanaka partnership for our coastal resort project. Today we'll finalize design specifications before moving to contract signing. The projector hummed to life, casting blueprints onto the wall. The lines were crisp, the layout sophisticated, the kind of engineering that won awards and convinced investors their money had found good soil. Elena moved through talking points with the smooth efficiency of someone who'd given this presentation 100 times in her head. Square footage, sustainable materials, load capacities calculated to withstand Oregon coast weather patterns. Marcus watched the blueprint scroll past his eyes, tracking details most people in the room would skip over in favor of the bottom line. Years of maintenance work in high-rises had left him with an instinct for structural logic, the kind of knowledge that lived in muscle memory rather than textbooks. He'd learned to read buildings the way some people read faces, looking for stress points. Places where confidence turned into liability. His brow furrowed. Ow. Something wasn't right. The support beams in the south wing didn't align with the load-bearing walls. According to basic IBC standards, International Building Code, the Bible of anyone who'd ever held a wrench in a building taller than 2 stories, this configuration would create uneven weight distribution. In stable ground, maybe survivable. In coastal terrain with seasonal flooding and soil erosion, it was a lawsuit waiting for weather to file it. Marcus tilted his head mentally, tracing the load paths the way he'd trace plumbing, following gravity and physics to their inevitable conclusions. The math didn't work. The structure wouldn't hold. Not catastrophically, not immediately, but in 5 years some engineer would be standing in a conference room explaining settlement cracks and foundation shifts to people who'd want to know why nobody caught this earlier. Elena advanced to the next slide. Marcus raised his hand slightly, not high enough to interrupt, but enough to catch her peripheral vision. Her gaze flicked to him for less than a second, but it was enough. She knew. Before we proceed, Elena said, voice smooth as fresh concrete, let's pause on that last diagram. I'd like everyone to take another look at the load distribution in the south wing. A ripple of confusion passed through the room. The lead architect, Brad Morrison, 45, the kind of confident that came from never being wrong publicly, frowned and zoomed back to the previous slide. Marcus rose quietly from his seat. May I? The architect hesitated, looking to Elena for guidance or permission, or perhaps reassurance that his expertise wasn't about to be questioned by someone who'd arrived without a briefcase. Elena nodded once. Go ahead, Marcus. Marcus approached the wall where the blueprint glowed like a patient waiting for diagnosis. He pointed to a section near the south wing, fingers steady despite every eye in the room tracking his movement. I'm not an engineer. He started with that not as apology, but as context. But I've worked on enough buildings to know these support beams aren't aligned with the load they're meant to carry. According to IBC Section 1604 load distribution requirements, this configuration creates stress concentration here. He traced the line where beam met wall. In coastal terrain with high moisture content and seasonal erosion, that means foundation settlement. Best case, you're looking at $3 million in remediation costs 5 years out. Worst case, structural liability that makes this resort uninsurable. The room went still. Not the quiet of agreement, but the silence of people recalculating their confidence in real time. The Tanaka delegation, Takeshi Yamamoto and two associates, all three wearing expressions that suggested they hadn't flown from Tokyo to watch amateurs point at walls, leaned forward. Yamamoto's eyes narrowed not in anger, but in the sharp focus of someone who'd built a career on catching expensive mistakes before they became catastrophic ones. "You're certain?" His English carried the precision of someone who'd learned the language specifically for contracts that couldn't afford ambiguity. Marcus nodded. "Certain enough that I'd bet my tools on it. If you want specifics, your engineers can run the load calculations, but I'd strongly suggest it before anyone signs." Brad Morrison's face went through a color spectrum that ended somewhere near defensive red. He zoomed in on the blueprint cross-referenced with another document on his tablet, then did what professionals do when they realize someone without credentials just caught their blind spot. He admitted it. "You're right." The words came out like pulling teeth, but they came. "This is a drafting error from the final revision. We didn't catch it in review." Elena didn't gloat. Her voice stayed level professional, the kind of tone that turns crisis into process. "Then let's make sure we're building something worthy of everyone's name on this contract." It took 40 minutes for the engineering team to return with corrected plans. When they did, the mood in the room had shifted not toward embarrassment, but toward something more valuable. Respect. The kind that comes when people realize you're more interested in being right than looking right. Yamamoto spoke first after reviewing the corrections. "Ms. Cross most would have signed and dealt with problems later. Discovery during construction would have delayed the project 6 months minimum. You chose to stop." Elena met his gaze without flinching. "Integrity costs less when you pay up front." The Tanaka delegate smiled faintly, the expression carrying warmth that numbers alone couldn't buy. "And you have good eyes in your corner." Marcus returned to his seat without ceremony, but Elena's glance followed him. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something deeper recognition that he'd just proven the point she'd been trying to make for weeks. That value didn't live in diplomas or corner offices. It lived in people who knew how to look at problems and see solutions instead of political angles. When the meeting ended, delegates shook hands with the kind of enthusiasm that came from dodging bullets they hadn't seen coming. No one mentioned the delay. If anything, the signed agreement carried more weight now forged through testing rather than assumed on faith. But the quiet victory didn't survive the elevator ride down. Rachel waited in the lobby, phone in hand, face carrying the particular tension of someone holding bad news with both hands. "Elena, we have a problem." Elena and Marcus stepped aside, letting the crowd flow past them toward lunch and afternoon appointments. "Graham's people just pushed a story to 2 blogs, Financial Watchdog and Investor Insight." Rachel held up her phone. The headline glowed accusatory, even on the small screen. "Crosstech CEO relies on janitor for 100 OD decision board at risk." The article was a masterclass in weaponized truth. It didn't lie. It just arranged facts like puzzle pieces to form a picture that resembled reality, the way a funhouse mirror resembles a window. Marcus Hayes, maintenance worker with no engineering degree, interrupted critical meeting. Investor sources question judgment. CEO appears to be leading with emotion rather than expertise. Marcus exhaled slowly. The sound carried the weight of someone who just watched their competence get rewritten as incompetence, their expertise dismissed as overreach. "So I'm the unqualified boyfriend now." "You're the reason they have a safe building to break ground on," Elena said, voice sharp enough to cut the resignation before it could settle. "But in their version, you're a prop in my PR stunt who's overstepping." Rachel's eyes softened by a fraction sympathy mixing with strategy. "We can't stop them from spinning. What we can do is control the next scene. Don't take the bait. We keep our tone steady, work clean, and we don't make this about personalities." Marcus looked between them, seeing the machinery of damage control spinning up calculating responses and counter-narratives and all the chess moves required to turn bad press into manageable noise. "What about Dylan?" Rachel's voice shifted, becoming careful in a way that suggested she'd been dreading this part. We'll monitor coverage, but the more they frame you as the mystery janitor, the greater the risk someone digs for personal details. Photos, school records, anything that adds color to the story. We'll keep his name out of it, but we need to be realistic about exposure. Elena stepped closer, voice low enough that only Marcus could hear. This is where you trust me. Marcus held her gaze. And this is where I remind you Dylan comes first. Always. She didn't blink. Always. She echoed the word, carrying the weight of promise rather than platitude. That evening, Harbor Cafe felt quieter than usual. Marcus poured coffee for the regulars, Mrs. Patterson's usual dark roast, the college kids' elaborate drinks with too many adjectives, but the rhythm felt off, like music played in the wrong key. Customers glanced at him differently now, some with curiosity, others with something closer to pity. Two students at the window booth had their phones out, heads together over shared screen light. One snorted, showed the other something. Dude, this is the guy. America's boyfriend janitor. Check this meme. Marcus kept wiping the counter. The motion stayed steady, even as something in his chest tightened. He'd spent 38 years learning that dignity wasn't something you declared, it was something you maintained through action. You kept working. You kept showing up. You didn't give people the satisfaction of watching you crack. But Dylan would see these articles eventually. Kids at school had parents who read financial blogs, who watched morning news, who gossiped about headlines over breakfast before driving their children to the same building where Dylan tried to be invisible. Marcus's phone buzzed. Text from Sarah, his sister. Dylan's asking questions. Kids at school showed him something on a tablet. Call me. He stepped into the back room, dialed. Sarah picked up on the first ring. He saw the meme, she said without preamble. The one with your photo and the caption about dating up. He's upset but trying to hide it. Marcus leaned against the wall, let it take some of the weight his spine couldn't hold right now. Is he there? Went to his room 20 minutes ago, won't talk. I'm closing early. Be there in 30. The drive home felt longer than geography justified. Marcus played through conversations in his head, trying to find words that would make an 8-year-old understand that the world was cruel in specific ways, that sometimes doing the right thing made you a target, that being good at something people didn't expect you to be good at could be threatening to people who'd built their identity on being the ones who knew things. None of it sounded right. None of it sounded like something that would comfort a kid who just wanted his dad to be normal. Dylan's door was closed when Marcus got home. Not locked, they'd agreed locks were for privacy, not barricades, but closed in a way that communicated boundaries. Marcus knocked twice, soft. Yeah? It's me, Bud. Can I come in? Silence then. Okay. Dylan sat on his bed, robot parts scattered across the comforter. He wasn't working on them, just sitting there staring at pieces that used to make sense. Marcus sat down beside him, careful not to crowd. Sarah said you had a tough day. Dylan's jaw worked, trying to hold something back. Then it came out all at once, the way pain does when pressure finally exceeds containment. Are you embarrassed about me? The question hit like a punch Marcus hadn't seen coming. What? No. Where's that coming from? I heard you and Elena. You don't want me on TV. Like you're hiding me. Dylan's voice cracked on the last word, 8 years old, trying to sound tough and failing beautifully. Marcus's chest felt like someone had reached in and squeezed. Con, no. Listen to me. He turned so they were eye to eye, no hiding from this. I'm protecting you, not hiding you. Those are different things. Do you understand? Dylan shook his head. Tears were coming now, the kind kids try to hold back because crying feels like losing. The people with cameras, the ones writing stories, they don't care if you're a kid who likes robots and math. They just want pictures they can sell. I don't want you on TV because you deserve to be a kid without strangers thinking they know you. That's not shame. That's love. But kids at school, Dylan's voice dropped to barely audible. They said you're just a janitor, that you're not smart enough. There it was, the real wound. Not the cameras or the articles, but the way other children had learned to weaponize class differences before they could spell the word privilege. Marcus took a breath. I'm not as smart as some people. Not in the ways they measure smart. But I know how to fix things they can't. I know how to look at a building and see what's wrong before it falls down. That's smart too. Different smart. And the people who matter know that. Do I matter? You're the only one who matters. Dylan leaned into him then the way he used to when he was smaller and the world made sense in simpler shapes. Marcus wrapped his arm around his son's shoulders and let the kid cry it out. No fixing this with words. Just presence. Just staying. After a while, Dylan pulled back, wiped his face with his sleeve. Can I stay at Grandma's tonight? It felt like rejection, even though Marcus knew it wasn't. Just a kid needing space to process information that shouldn't have been his to carry. Yeah, buddy, I'll call her. When Dylan packed his overnight bag carefully, methodically, the way Marcus had taught him to fold clothes so they didn't wrinkle, something shifted in Marcus's understanding of what this arrangement with Elena was costing. Not money, not time, but the one thing he couldn't afford to lose his son's trust that the world was safe enough to navigate. Elena's text came through at 9 p.m. How is he? Marcus stared at the message for a full minute before responding. Confused, hurt, at his grandmother's because he needed distance from me. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, I'm sorry. He typed back, not your fault. Deleted it. Tried again. This was always the risk. Deleted that too. Finally settled on, talk tomorrow. Yes. Marcus sat alone in the apartment that suddenly felt too big without Dylan's noise filling the corners. He looked at the coffee table where they'd built robots together last weekend, at the fridge covered in spelling tests and drawings, at all the evidence of a life that was supposed to be simple work. Hard. Raise your kid. Be good, and realized that somewhere along the way, simple had become impossible. His phone buzzed again. Not Elena this time. Rachel. Marcus, don't respond to any media requests. They're going to start calling. Block any numbers you don't recognize. And if anyone approaches Dylan at school, you call me immediately. I'm putting a legal letter together for the district. No one talks to him without your written consent. Thanks. This isn't your fault, Rachel said, and the fact that she felt the need to say it made Marcus realize how close to the edge he must sound. Tell that to my kid. There was a pause on the line, heavy with all the things professionalism prevented her from saying. Then, he'll understand eventually. Kids are resilient, but right now, just be his dad. That's the only job that matters. After she hung up, Marcus sat in the dark and wondered if being a good father meant walking away from situations that hurt his son, even if those situations could provide the resources to protect him. The math didn't work any direction he calculated it. Morning came too early and too bright. Marcus called in to take a personal day from Crosstech, his first in 2 years, and drove to his mother's house to pick up Dylan. The kid was quieter than usual but agreed to spend Saturday at the Science Museum. Just the two of them. No phones except for emergencies. No checking headlines or social media. Just dinosaurs and physics exhibits and the kind of normal that used to be their whole world. At the How Things Work exhibit, Dylan stopped in front of a suspension bridge model. How come it doesn't fall? Marcus knelt beside him, pointing out the cables and towers. Weight distribution. No single point has to be strong enough to hold everything. The load gets shared. Each part just has to do its job in the right place. Dylan studied the model with the concentration of someone looking for metaphors he could apply to problems that weren't about bridges. So being strong isn't about being the biggest. Being strong is about knowing where you're needed and showing up there. They moved through the museum, slowly stopping at exhibits that caught Dylan's interest. In the cafeteria over sandwiches that cost too much and tasted like cardboard blessed by corporate catering, Dylan finally asked the question Marcus had been waiting for. "Do you like Elena? For real?" Marcus set his sandwich down. Honest questions deserved honest answers even when honesty was complicated. "I respect her. She's been good to us. She's trying to help. But do you like her? Not because of the deal." "I don't know yet, bud." Marcus met his son's eyes. "Maybe. Is that okay?" Dylan considered this with the gravity of someone making decisions that would reshape family geometry. "It's okay, but I don't want her to go away and then you be sad." "That's fair." They spent the rest of Saturday together, museum, then home for dinner, then a movie. Neither of them paid much attention to, because the company mattered more than the plot. When Dylan fell asleep on the couch halfway through, Marcus carried him to bed the way he used to when the kid was smaller before school and growth spurts had made him almost too big for carrying. Marcus stood in the doorway watching his son sleep and felt the full weight of every decision he'd made in the last 2 weeks settle onto his shoulders like snow that might become avalanche if he moved wrong. Sunday morning, Mrs. Duffy from next door called. Her heating system had given up making warmth in favor of making noise. Marcus and Dylan spent 3 hours in her basement, Marcus showing Dylan how to diagnose furnace problems, teaching him to listen to the machine's complaints and translate them into solutions. When they finished, Mrs. Duffy made them lunch sandwiches that actually tasted like someone cared about ingredients and told Dylan what she'd probably been saving to tell him all morning. "Your dad has a gift, young man. He fixes things people don't even know are broken." Dylan looked at Marcus differently after that. Not fixed exactly, but less broken than yesterday. Progress measured in small degrees. "Can Elena come to my science fair next Friday?" The question came out of nowhere, or maybe from everywhere, the way kids process information in private before announcing conclusions in public. Marcus set his coffee down. "Why?" "She explained fractions better than my teacher. Maybe she's good at science, too." Something in Marcus's chest unclenched. If Dylan wanted Elena there, if he was ready to see her as someone other than the reason his dad was in the news, then maybe the damage wasn't permanent. Maybe they were building something that could survive scrutiny. "I'll ask her." Monday morning, Rachel's investigation bore fruit that tasted like vindication. The private investigator had interviewed the paralegal who'd filed the CPS report, a junior associate who cracked under the pressure of potentially losing his license. He confirmed Graham Sterling had personally directed the filing, provided the details, and paid for the service through a shell LLC. Rachel laid it all out in Elena's office documents, recordings, testimony sworn under oath. "We have him, but we still need the confrontation. Get him on record either admitting it or lying in a way we can prove false." "Thursday," Elena said. "Investor conference. He'll be there to make noise about the Tanaka situation. We corner him at the loading dock exit." "You're sure about confronting him directly? We could route this through legal channels, let the ethics committees handle it." Elena's expression carried the particular steel of someone who'd stopped asking permission to stand up. "I want him to see my face when he realizes what he's done to an 8-year-old boy. That's not something I'm delegating." Tuesday brought the CPS follow-up visit. Angela Ruiz returned with a supervisor's standard procedure when anonymous reports continued beyond initial investigation. They asked about media attention, about Dylan's emotional state, about whether the increased scrutiny was affecting home stability. Dylan answered honestly. Yes, some kids at school had questions. Yes, it was uncomfortable. But Dad had explained things. Dad was handling it. Dad made him feel safe. Angela made notes with the efficient sympathy of someone who'd seen worse situations masquerade as better ones, and better situations camouflaged by poverty that looked like neglect. She saw through the surface here. saw a kid who was loved, a father who was present, a home that functioned even under pressure. Mr. Hayes, we're closing this case. Everything checks out, but I recommend establishing a media protection plan, legal language preventing interviews, photo publication, anything that could compromise Dylan's privacy. Marcus nodded. Elena's legal team is already drafting it. The supervisor made a final note. Whoever filed that initial report wasted our time. But for what it's worth, she looked directly at Marcus. You're doing something right. After they left, Marcus called Elena. CPS closed the case. He could hear the relief in her voice even through the phone's compression. That's good. That's really good. Dylan wants you at his science fair Friday. A pause. Then, really, don't read too much into it. He just thinks you're good at math. She laughed, and the sound carried warmth that had nothing to do with their arrangement. I'll be there. Wednesday night, the charity dinner Dylan insisted on attending. Not because he wanted to be seen, but because, as he explained with the logic of someone who'd thought it through if people were going to talk about him. Anyway, they might as well see that he was fine. Marcus wasn't sure about the wisdom of bringing an 8-year-old into the line of fire, but Elena backed Dylan's reasoning. He's right. And we'll have security. No photographer gets close enough for clear shots. The Riverside Convention Center wore its fundraising best chandeliers and champagne speeches about education equity delivered by people who'd never worried about tuition. Marcus wore the same borrowed suit. Elena had offered to have one tailored for him, but he'd declined. Not pride, just a recognition that borrowed was honest, and honest mattered more than perfect fit. Dylan wore a button-down shirt Sarah had pressed within an inch of its life hair combed into submission, carrying himself with the careful dignity of someone who'd decided that being brave looked better than being scared. They made it through dinner without incident. Dylan was polite to the adults at their table, answered questions about school with the bare minimum required by courtesy, ate his chicken with the focus of someone completing an assignment rather than enjoying a meal. But when they walked out at 9 p.m., the van was waiting. Marcus saw its first black vehicle idling in the loading zone side door, already sliding open, photographers spilling out like they'd been compressed and suddenly released. 8 of them, maybe 10 cameras up and aimed before anyone could react. They weren't shooting the building or the crowd. They were shooting Dylan. Kid over here. Dylan, smile for us. Hey, buddy, how do you like having a rich stepmom? Marcus moved on, instinct wrapping his jacket around Dylan's head, creating a hood that blocked faces and made the kid invisible. But the photographers pressed closer, sensing weakness, smelling the story in Dylan's wide eyes and the way his small hand gripped Marcus's sleeve. Elena stepped in front of them. Both arms spread like she was physically blocking traffic. Her voice cut through the shouting, with the authority of someone who'd spent a decade making boardrooms go quiet. He's 8 years old. This isn't your story. One photographer, younger than the others, hungry in the way that suggested he hadn't learned boundaries yet pushed forward. Public sidewalk lady, First Amendment. He's a minor. If one photo of his face appears anywhere, I will personally sue every outlet that runs it. And unlike you, I have lawyers who don't sleep. You can't try me. Rachel appeared from somewhere, phone already at her ear, calling hotel security. Behind her, a man in a suit that screamed ACLU attorney materialized with the timing of someone who'd been briefed to wait for exactly this scenario. The cameras hesitated. Legal threats had a way of making opportunistic photographers calculate risk versus reward, but they'd already taken shots. The damage might already be traveling through fiber optic cables toward editorial desks that wouldn't care about 8-year-olds if the image drove traffic. Security arrived, 3 uniforms and a manager who'd apparently been warned that Elena Cross was not someone you wanted filing complaints. They formed a barrier, started the process of requesting memory card checks under threat of trespass charges. In the chaos, Dylan started shaking. Not crying, that would come later. Just shaking the way bodies do when adrenaline floods systems too small to process it efficiently. Elena crouched down to his eye level, blocking him from cameras with her body. "You're safe, I promise." Dylan's voice came out small, younger than 8. "Why do they want pictures of me?" Elena's expression shifted into something fierce and protective that had nothing to do with contracts or public relations. "Because some people think stories are more important than the people in them. They're wrong." In the car heading home, Dylan sat between Marcus and Elena, holding both their hands. The shaking had stopped, but his grip stayed tight, anchoring himself to the adults who'd stood between him and lenses. "Thank you," he said to Elena, small voice but steady, "for not letting them." "Always, Dylan. Always." Marcus looked at Elena over his son's head, and something fundamental shifted in how he understood their arrangement. This wasn't performance. She'd put herself between cameras and a child she had no legal obligation to protect. She'd threatened lawsuits she'd have to follow through on. She'd made herself a target to keep Dylan safe. That wasn't something you could write into contracts. That was something else entirely. Back at the apartment after Dylan fell asleep, still wearing his dress clothes because he was too exhausted to change Marcus. And Elena sat in the kitchen drinking coffee. Neither of them wanted. "I'm sorry," Elena said. "You didn't hire those photographers. But I created the situation that made him a target." Marcus shook his head. "Graham created the situation. You just offered me a way to fight back. There's a difference." Silence settled between them, comfortable in ways it hadn't been 2 weeks ago. Finally, Elena spoke again, voice careful. "Tomorrow I'm confronting Graham, loading dock 6 p.m. I wanted you to know." "Where?" "Waterfront Hotel." "But Marcus, I don't want you there. This could get ugly, and I need you focused on Dylan." He heard what she wasn't saying, that she was trying to protect him the way she'd protected his son, that she thought fighting this battle alone would somehow keep him clean of the mess. "I'll think about it," he said, which they both knew meant he'd already decided, but wasn't ready to argue about it yet. Thursday morning, Marcus called in sick to Crosstech, dropped Dylan at school with extra instructions for the front office about photo permissions, and spent the day trying to decide if showing up at a confrontation he'd been told to avoid made him supportive or stupid. By 5:30 p.m., he was sitting in his truck in the Waterfront Hotel parking lot, watching the loading dock from a distance that gave him plausible deniability. He told himself he was just making sure Elena was safe, that he'd leave if everything looked fine, that he wasn't actually planning to insert himself into a situation she'd specifically asked him to stay out of. At 5:55, Elena and Rachel appeared near the dock, tucked into shadows deep enough to hide intentions. Rachel held her phone like a weapon recording light, blinking ready. At 6:02, Graham Sterling emerged from the service entrance, tie loosened phone already at his ear. He looked like a man who'd just finished winning an argument and was ready to win the next one. Elena stepped into his path. Graham's expression cycled through surprise, annoyance, calculation. "Elena, unusual venue. I wanted somewhere without witnesses who'd lie for you." He laughed, the sound carrying all the confidence of someone who'd never actually faced consequences. "If this is about the media coverage, it's about you weaponizing Child Protective Services against an 8-year-old. Graham's smile didn't falter, but his eyes changed prey, realizing the predator had been studying attack patterns. "CPS visits are routine. If your maintenance worker can't handle..." Elena held up her hand and Rachel pressed play on her phone. Graham's voice filled the loading dock. "If CPS spooks him enough, Cross will fold the PR stunt. Simple pressure, clean hands." The blood drained from Graham's face. "Where did you..." "We have the email thread. The Shell LLC, the paralegal who filed the report and is now cooperating with investigators. We have everything, Graham. Every step you took, every dollar you spent, every lie you told yourself to justify targeting a child." You're bluffing. Elena stepped closer, and her voice dropped to something cold enough to make the evening air feel warm by comparison. I don't bluff with children's safety. You made a choice when you decided an 8-year-old was acceptable collateral damage. Now you make another choice. Stop the smear campaign tonight or tomorrow. Every ethics committee you serve on gets this file. Every board, every fund, every person who's ever trusted you with their capital. Graham looked around for cameras for backup for any leverage that might tilt the situation back in his favor. Found nothing but concrete and Elena's unwavering stare. This is extortion. This is documentation. You're welcome to lawyer up drag. This through court spend the next year explaining to judges why you thought attacking a second grader was sound business strategy. Or you can walk away, keep your mouth shut, and hope I decide mercy looks better than justice. Graham's jaw worked. Then he turned and walked toward his car without another word. No threats, no denials, just retreat dressed as dignity. Rachel lowered her phone. We got it. Clean audio. His words, no ambiguity. Elena nodded but didn't look away from Graham's departing figure until his car pulled out of the lot. Then she turned and saw Marcus standing 20 feet away, having emerged from his truck at some point during the confrontation. I told you not to come. I know. Marcus walked closer, each step deliberate. But you shouldn't face wolves alone. Not when they've been hunting my son. Something in Elena's expression cracked, not breaking, but opening. Like a door that had been locked, finally deciding the person on the other side was safe enough to let in. This is where you trust me, she'd said in his apartment. And this is where I stand beside you, Marcus said now. Because that's what people do when it matters. Rachel cleared her throat diplomatically, reminding them she existed. We should go. File everything tonight while it's fresh. They walked to the parking lot together, Elena, Marcus, Rachel trailing with her phone full of evidence. The city lights were coming on, painting Portland in shades of amber and possibility. Tomorrow there would be legal filings and board meetings and all the machinery of accountability grinding into motion. But tonight, in the space between confrontation and consequence, Marcus understood what he'd been too careful to admit before. This arrangement had stopped being temporary somewhere between a repaired heel and a protected child, somewhere between coffee shop rehearsals and loading dock confrontations, somewhere in the accumulation of moments where respect had shifted into something that didn't have a 3-week expiration date. He didn't say it out loud, not yet, but the knowledge settled into his chest like foundation, solid, permanent weight-bearing. Elena glanced at him as they reached their cars. Dylan's science fair tomorrow. Yeah, he's nervous about his project. What's the topic? How buildings stand strong. Load distribution stress points, why some things last and others fall. She smiled, and the expression carried warmth that had nothing to do with streetlights. I'll be there. After she drove away, Marcus sat in his truck for a long moment watching the city organize itself for evening. His phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. Is Elena still coming tomorrow? He typed back, yeah, buddy, she'll be there. 3 dots appeared. Then, good, I want her to see my project. Marcus drove home through streets that felt different than they had 2 weeks ago. Not because the city had changed, but because his understanding of what he was building had shifted from transaction to something that resembled foundation. Something that might hold weight if they gave it time to cure. Tomorrow, his son would present a project about structures that last. And somewhere in that presentation, Marcus suspected Dylan would teach him something about the difference between temporary and permanent, between what you build to survive and what you build to stay. The Crosstech Auditorium held 200 people and felt like it contained twice that in tension. Morning light filtered through high windows, casting geometric shadows across rows of chairs filled with shareholders who'd spent the last 3 weeks reading headlines and forming opinions. The stage waited at the front simple podium screen for presentation's microphone that would amplify every word into permanent record. Elena stood backstage with Rachel reviewing notes that had been revised so many times, the paper showed wear at the fold lines. In 3 minutes, she'd walk out to defend not just her leadership, but the choices that had led to standing in a loading dock threatening a man with evidence he'd tried to weaponize children. "You ready?" Rachel's voice carried the steady calm of someone who'd wargamed every possible outcome and prepared contingencies for outcomes they hadn't thought of yet. Elena straightened her jacket. "I've been ready since the first lie was printed." In the back row, Marcus sat beside Dylan. The boy wore a button-down shirt and held a poster board he'd made himself construction paper and markers forming the words, "You did great," with a robot drawn in careful detail beside a calculator. No one else in the auditorium had brought handmade signs of support. No one else needed to. Dylan leaned close to whisper, "Is she nervous?" Marcus watched Elena through the stage entrance gap, saw the way she held her spine like rebar. "Probably, but she's going to do it anyway. That's what brave looks like." The board chair. Patricia Caldwell, 63, gray hair and sharper instincts, took the podium first. Standard opening remarks about fiscal responsibility and shareholder value and all the language that turned companies into machines people forgot were run by humans. Then she shifted gears. "Before we discuss quarterly results, Ms. Cross has requested time to address recent events with full transparency." Elena walked to the podium carrying nothing but a small remote for the presentation screen. No notes, no shield of paper between her and the room. She pressed the button and the screen lit with a timeline, dates, emails, audio, waveforms, all of it, organized with the precision of someone who understood that evidence spoke louder when it didn't need explanation. "Good morning. 3 weeks ago, an anonymous tip was filed with Child Protective Services claiming neglect of an 8-year-old boy. That boy's father is Marcus Hayes, who you may know from recent media coverage as my boyfriend, a term we used temporarily to manage narrative during a difficult news cycle." She paused. Let that land. The CPS investigation found no merit. But the filing itself was designed to intimidate, to pressure, to weaponize state resources against a private citizen whose only involvement with this company was helping me appear more human to cameras. The room went still. Not the quiet of agreement, but the silence of people recalculating assumptions. Elena clicked to the next slide. Audio waveform timestamp transcript below. "This is a recording of Graham Sterling, activist investor, discussing his strategy with an associate. I'll play 30 seconds. Graham's voice filled the auditorium. "If CPS spooks him enough, Cross will fold the PR stunt. Simple pressure, clean hands. I don't care about the kid. I care about removing her emotional leverage." Someone in the third row gasped. Others leaned forward, faces hardening with the particular anger reserved for people who'd just discovered someone they'd trusted with capital had no moral floor. "The Ethics Committee has complete documentation," Elena continued, voice level as a construction grade. "Email trails, financial transactions, sworn testimony from the paralegal who filed the false report. Mr. Sterling is under review by multiple boards. This company will not tolerate, will not reward tactics that endanger children to gain leverage in business disputes." Graham Sterling stood from his seat in the second row, face red in a way that suggested blood pressure and fury were negotiating terms. "This is character assassination. You can't prove—" Patricia Caldwell's voice cut through like a gavel. "Mr. Sterling, please sit down. We'll address your concerns in executive session." Graham looked around for allies, found none, and walked out. The door closed behind him with the finality of chapters ending. Elena waited until the room settled, then clicked to financial slides. Revenue charts. Growth projections. The Tanaka partnership signed, sealed, currently breaking ground with corrected structural plans that would save millions in future liability. She walked through numbers with the competence that had built this company before anyone questioned whether she had the spine for leadership. During Q&A, an investor 5 rows back raised his hand. "Ms. Cross-regarding your relationship with Marcus Hayes, was any of it genuine, or was this purely crisis management theater? Elena didn't hesitate. Mr. Hayes and I entered a temporary arrangement to manage media narrative. That arrangement ended 3 days ago. What remains is respect between two people who chose honesty over convenience. Marcus Hayes identified a critical structural flaw in our Tanaka resort design, a flaw that would have cost this company millions and potentially lives. He did this with expertise earned through years of maintenance work, not credentials from institutions. I will not diminish that contribution by reducing it to performance. Another investor, this one closer to the front. So it was fake. The timeline was strategic. The character was authentic. And if this board is more interested in my personal life than our 12% revenue growth, then perhaps we need different conversations about priorities. The room shifted. Not everyone was convinced, but enough nodded to suggest the math was working in her favor. The vote came after 2 more hours of presentations and debate, 87% confidence in current leadership. Graham Sterling's advisory privileges suspended pending investigation. Motion to strengthen ethics policies regarding targeting of employees' families, unanimous approval. When Patricia Caldwell brought down the gavel declaring the meeting adjourned, Elena walked off stage, knowing she'd survived, but at costs still being tallied. Marcus and Dylan waited in the hallway. Dylan held up his poster, suddenly shy about the gesture now that the moment had arrived. Elena crouched to his eye level. "Did you make this for me?" Dylan nodded. "You had a big test today. I wanted you to have good luck." Elena's eyes went bright in a way that suggested she'd been holding composure through sheer will and a child's kindness had just found the crack. "It worked. Thank you, Dylan." She hugged him, brief, careful, asking permission through action. Dylan hugged back with the unself-conscious warmth of someone who'd decided she'd earned access to his small circle of trusted adults. Marcus extended his hand for a formal shake, the kind that communicated respect in rooms where people were watching. "Congratulations." On what? Surviving? On refusing to compromise. That's harder than winning. Rachel appeared from around a corner phone, already buzzing with calls she'd been screening. "Media wants a statement. Tell them we've said everything that matters. The rest is in the quarterly report." Elena looked at Marcus and Dylan at the poster board that would never make headlines, but meant more than any that would. "I have somewhere I need to be." Dylan's face lit with the realization that meant him. Science fair. Wouldn't miss it. The elementary school gymnasium smelled like floor wax and nervous energy. Tables lined the space in neat rows, each one displaying projects that represented weeks of work compressed into poster boards and models. Dylan's station sat near the back, a bridge made from popsicle sticks demonstrating load distribution, accompanied by diagrams explaining why some structures lasted and others failed. Elena arrived still wearing her boardroom clothes, looking profoundly out of place among parents in jeans and teachers in cardigans. But she walked straight to Dylan's table like it was the only destination that mattered. Dylan straightened, suddenly aware that his robot bridge might not measure up to whatever she was expecting. "It's about how buildings stand strong. My dad taught me that strength isn't about being hard, it's about distributing weight so nothing breaks." Elena studied the bridge with the same attention she'd given financial projections 3 hours ago. Asked questions about load calculations and stress points and why he'd chosen this particular design. Dylan answered with growing confidence, realizing she wasn't just being polite, she genuinely cared about the engineering. The judges came by 3 teachers wearing lanyards and carrying clipboards. They asked Dylan to explain his hypothesis. Walk them through his testing methodology, demonstrate what happened when weight exceeded capacity. He did with the clear enthusiasm of someone who'd found the overlap between what he loved and what he was good at. When they moved on, leaving behind a blue ribbon they'd stuck to his poster board, Dylan turned to Elena with wonder breaking across his face. "I won." "You earned it." She paused, then added what felt true. Your dad was right. You're remarkable. Marcus arrived 10 minutes later, having closed Harbor Cafe early to make the last half hour of judging. He saw Elena first, saw the way she was listening to Dylan explain his project to a kid from another class, saw the ease in her posture that suggested she'd stopped performing and started just being present. He walked over, ruffled Dylan's hair in the way that made the kid squirm, but smile. Blue ribbon. That's my boy. Elena helped. She asked questions that made me think of better ways to explain the physics. That's because she's good at making complicated things make sense. Marcus met Elena's eyes over Dylan's head, the look carrying gratitude and something else that didn't have names yet but was building foundation. They stayed until the gym emptied, helping Dylan carefully pack his bridge into a box that would transport it home without breaking the careful structure. In the parking lot, Elena's car waited beside Marcus's truck, expensive sedan next to work vehicle, a visual reminder of all the gaps that should have made this impossible. Pizza, Dylan asked with the hopeful tone of someone who knew Friday nights had rules, but sometimes rules bent. Marcus looked to Elena, offering her an exit if she needed one. We usually do pizza Fridays. You're welcome to join, but I'd like that. They took separate vehicles to Antonio's, a family place with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox that still played Sinatra if you fed it quarters. Dylan picked the booth by the window, slid in beside Elena like it was the most natural arrangement in the world, started telling her about his plans for next year's science fair, with the enthusiasm of someone who'd discovered that adults could be interested in kid problems without condescension. Elena listened. Really listened. Asked follow-up questions about whether he'd considered testing different materials, whether load distribution principles applied to other structures, whether maybe they could visit a construction site sometime to see engineering in real scale. Marcus watched them over his pizza slice and felt something settle that had been loose since Jennifer left, the fear that Dylan would grow up missing half his foundation. Elena wasn't trying to be Dylan's mother. She was just showing up, being present, treating his kid like he mattered beyond being leverage or optics. That was worth more than contracts or salary bumps or any of the transactional benefits this arrangement had started with. After dinner in the parking lot, Dylan hugged Elena goodnight like it was routine. She hugged back, promised to let him know if she found any good construction sites worth visiting. Then she turned to Marcus with an expression that suggested she had things to say, but wasn't sure if a grocery store parking lot was the venue. Walk me to my car. Dylan climbed into the truck, already pulling out his tablet for the drive home. Marcus followed Elena across pavement still warm from afternoon sun, neither of them quite ready to name what the evening had shifted into. Thank you for coming, Marcus said. To the science fair, to dinner. You didn't have to. I wanted to. That's different than obligation. She paused beside her car keys in hand, but not opening the door yet. The contract expired 3 days ago. I know. So what happens now? Marcus took a breath, let it out steady. We stop pretending to figure out what's real. Elena's smile carried relief and nerves in equal measure. That sounds terrifying. Most things worth doing are. They didn't kiss, didn't make promises about next steps or define what they were becoming. Just agreed to dinner next week. Just the two of them. No cameras, no crisis, no 8-year-old chaperone, and see where honesty took them when performance ended. Marcus drove Dylan home through streets lit by stores closing and restaurants opening, the city shifting between versions of itself. Dylan fell asleep in the passenger seat, ribbon still clutched in one hand, a kid who'd won something and knew it. 2 weeks after the shareholder meeting, Elena stood in what would become the quiet room, a space on Crosstech's 15th floor that had previously stored outdated server equipment and optimism about technologies that never scaled. Now it was being transformed into something more useful. Rest space for night shift workers. Marcus stood beside architectural plans spread across a folding table, making notes about electrical outlet placement and where to put comfortable chairs that wouldn't look institutional. This wasn't his job. He'd been promoted to facility operations supervisor 3 days ago, with salary that meant Dylan's college fund could start being more than theoretical. But designing this space felt personal. Coffee station here, he pointed to a corner with good ventilation. Bookshelves along this wall, lockers over there for personal belongings. No cameras, no monitoring, just space to be human for 30 minutes. Elena nodded, trusting his instincts about what night shift workers needed, because he'd been one for 4 years and understood that rest wasn't about luxury, it was about dignity. When can we open it? 2 weeks if contractors stay on schedule, 3 if the universe decides to be difficult. Let's plan for 3 and hope for 2. The sign would go up later, simple text, no corporate branding, the quiet room, designed by Marcus Hayes, facility operations supervisor. Not boyfriend, not temporary arrangement, just his name attached to work that mattered. Elena touched the plans lightly, fingers tracing the space that would become refuge. You know you're changing this company's culture without even trying. I'm just solving problems I wish someone had solved for me. That's what leadership looks like. A month later, the Hayes Cross Scholarship Fund launched at a press conference neither Marcus nor Elena wanted, but Rachel insisted would control the narrative. $500,000 annually for children of maintenance workers, service staff, sanitation crews, the people who kept buildings running while other people took credit for buildings that ran. 20 scholarships in the first year. Full tuition to community college or trade schools, no essays about overcoming adversity or proving worth, just application transcripts and a letter from a supervisor confirming employment. The first recipient spoke at the podium, Ashley Martinez, 17, daughter of a woman who'd cleaned office buildings downtown for 12 years while raising 3 kids alone. Her voice shook, but held. My mom always told me work is work. No shame in it, but college felt impossible until this. Now I can study engineering, build things that last, maybe design the buildings Mom will clean and know they're built right. Marcus sat in the front row, Dylan beside him, both of them understanding that this was what money looked like when it stopped being power and started being access. Elena stood at the back, avoiding the spotlight, letting the recipients own the moment. Afterward, Dylan tugged Marcus's sleeve. Could that be me later? That is you, just in different timing. Graham Sterling's name appeared in trades less frequently as autumn turned toward winter, suspended from 3 boards. Ethics investigations concluded with findings of misconduct but no criminal charges. The evidence was circumstantial enough that prosecutors declined to pursue it, but concrete enough that reputation became rubble. He resigned from all positions, moved back to New York, became the cautionary tale people referenced when discussing the difference between aggressive investing and using children as ammunition. Elena didn't celebrate his exile. Victory without satisfaction. Justice without joy. Just the quiet relief that came from boundaries being enforced, consequences being delivered, systems working the way they were supposed to if you pushed hard enough. He'll rebuild, Rachel predicted over coffee in Elena's office. Men like that always do. Not here. Not with companies that value basic humanity over quarterly gains. You're optimistic. I'm stubborn. There's a difference. Marcus's custody situation resolved anticlimactically. With stable employment, legal representation, and CPS closure, Jennifer's lawyer withdrew the petition without fanfare or explanation. Judge Kemp looked over. The Phil looked at Marcus and made the ruling. Everyone knew was coming. Full custody, maintained, no modifications required. Marcus Hayes had demonstrated exemplary parenting under circumstances that would have broken lesser fathers. Walking out of the courthouse, Dylan between them. Elena's hand brushed Marcus's. Not holding, not yet. Not in front of the kid, but touching in a way that said she'd been prepared to testify if needed, to stand beside him through whatever came. You never needed me, she said quietly. Needed's complicated, but I'm glad you were there. That evening, standing in Marcus's kitchen, while Dylan showed Elena how to make hot chocolate the way they always made it, 2 scoops powder, 1 pump vanilla stir, counterclockwise because Dylan believed it made a difference, Marcus realized they'd crossed some invisible threshold between temporary and permanent without announcing it. She had a drawer now. T-shirt for sleeping over when it got late and driving home seemed silly. Toothbrush beside us in the bathroom. Space in the fridge for her preferred yogurt brand that Dylan now requested too. Small things. Domestic things. The kind of incremental claiming that happened when people stopped asking if they belonged and just started belonging. 2 months after the shareholder meeting, Marcus asked Elena to dinner. Not pizza with Dylan or coffee between obligations, but actual date with reservation and planning. And the understanding that they were testing whether attraction survived when crisis stopped providing structure. He picked a rooftop place overlooking Portland where the city lights turned the river into liquid gold and the October air carried enough chill to justify sitting close for warmth. Brought sandwiches he'd made himself, better ingredients than restaurant markup careful construction that suggested he'd thought about what she'd like. Elena wore jeans and a sweater the first time he'd seen her, in true casual hair loose and no makeup beyond what vanity required. She looked younger, less like a headline, more like someone who'd decided being photographed mattered less than being comfortable. They talked about everything, her building the company from a dorm room, learning that success made people assume you'd cheated rather than worked. His raising Dylan alone, the particular fear that came from being the only adult responsible for another human's whole world. How loneliness looked different depending on whether you had too much space or too little. "I don't have a ring," Marcus said eventually, after they'd exhausted small talk and arrived at truths that felt too large for casual delivery. Elena smiled. "We've discussed this. I don't need jewelry. I mean..." He stopped, recalibrated. "I don't have one yet, but I'd like to. Someday, if that's something you'd want." Her eyes went bright in the way that suggested she'd been hoping he'd say something like this, but hadn't wanted to assume. "Are you asking about my intentions?" "I'm a maintenance guy. I plan ahead. Like to know if the foundation's solid before I start building." "Then yes, someday. When we're both ready and Dylan's comfortable and it feels like the next logical step rather than the romantic gesture people expect." That sounds perfect. They kissed, then first real one, not performance for cameras or quick goodbye in parking lots, but the kind that marked transitions. Tasted like coffee and future and the particular sweetness of things earned through survival rather than given through luck. When they pulled apart, the city spread below them like promise in infrastructure. All those lights marking homes where people were building their own versions of family from whatever materials they had. "I want you to know something," Elena said, voice steady but vulnerable in ways boardrooms never got to see. "When I ran into your cafe that night, I was drowning. Not in crisis, in being exactly what everyone said I was. Cold. Calculating. More machine than human. You reminded me I could be both. Strategic and kind. Successful and soft. I'm grateful for that." Marcus took her hand, laced their fingers together. "You did that yourself. I just held up a mirror that wasn't funhouse distorted." 3 months after their contract expired, Dylan asked the question at breakfast. Saturday morning pancakes, the 3 of them at the table in what had become routine. "Is Elena moving in?" Marcus and Elena exchanged glances over coffee mugs. They'd been avoiding that conversation, letting things develop organically, but kids had a way of cutting through careful pacing to ask what adults danced around. "Would you want that?" Marcus asked carefully. Dylan considered while chewing, taking the question as seriously as it deserved. "She's here every weekend anyway. And some weeknights. Her toothbrush lives in our bathroom. Seems like she already lives here just with extra steps." Elena laughed despite herself. "You make a logical argument." So, is that a yes? Dylan pressed, not willing to let adults hide behind vagueness. Marcus looked at Elena. They'd talked about this in abstract someday eventually when timing felt right. But Dylan was right. They were already living the reality, just pretending it was temporary. How about we try it gradually? Elena suggested. I move some things over, stay more nights, see how it feels when it's official rather than accidental. Dylan nodded, satisfied with the plan, because it came with clear steps rather than maybes. Okay, but if you're moving in, you have to help with dishes, house rule. Deal. They shook on it, 8-year-old and billionaire CEO negotiating terms of domestic cohabitation like it was merger paperwork. Marcus watched them and felt the last piece of fear he'd been carrying since Jennifer left, that Dylan would grow up with half a foundation settle into something like peace. 6 months after Elena crashed into Harbor Cafe asking for 10 minutes, Dylan stood at the front of the cafe for community reading hour. 30 people crowded into the space neighbors. Teachers' night shift workers from Crosstech, Mrs. Duffy in the front row with tissues already deployed. Dylan held stapled pages, his story typed and printed with care, illustrated with drawings that showed more effort than artistic talent. He cleared his throat, looked at Marcus and Elena sitting together in the second row, and began. My story is called The Strongest Cup. It's about a man who thinks he just fixes things and a woman who thinks she just builds things, and how they learned family is what you build together. The story unfolded in Dylan's voice, stilted in places where 8-year-old vocabulary reached for concepts that needed more words, but honest in ways that professional writing often lost. He told about a rainy night and a door that opened like permission. About a coffee tray that became shield because good people don't need armor if they have purpose. About a heel repaired by hands that knew the difference between price and value. He told about a boy whose math got better when noise got softer. About adults who decided truth doesn't need fireworks, only light. About how the strongest things aren't the ones that never break, they're the ones you hold together. When Dylan reached the last paragraph, his voice steadied into something that sounded older than his years. The strongest cup isn't the one that doesn't spill. It's the one you refill together. The applause came warm and lasted longer than politeness required. Mrs. Duffy cried openly, tissues earning their keep. Marcus felt his chest tighten with the particular pride that comes from watching your child understand something true about the world and choose to share it. Elena wiped her eyes discreetly, caught between wanting to preserve composure and accepting that 8-year-olds who wrote stories about their family earned the right to make grown-ups cry. Dylan hopped off his stool, ran to Marcus, and Elena hugged them both simultaneously in a way that required awkward angles but communicated everything that mattered. Did I do good? You were brave, Marcus managed past the tightness in his throat. And honest, Elena added, voice not quite steady. That's harder than being perfect. After the reading, they walked home through evening streets where October was negotiating terms with November leaves, discussing when to let go of branches. Dylan walked between them, holding both their hands, swinging his arms in rhythm that made walking harder, but felt necessary. Can we make hot cocoa? The eternal question, the one that meant home. Always. At the apartment, bigger now, 2-bedroom upgraded to 3 when Elena's moving in became official rather than theoretical, they fell into the choreography of evening. Dylan to the shower, Marcus to the kitchen, Elena to the homework check, making sure math was done and spelling was practiced and science projects were on schedule. Later, after Dylan fell asleep, still riding the high of applause and validation, Marcus and Elena stood at the kitchen window watching the city organize itself for night. Lights coming on in windows, marking homes where other families were doing their own versions of this, the small rituals that turned houses into belonging. Remember when you asked me for 10 minutes? Marcus said, arm around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. Best decision I made all year. You were running from cameras. I was running towards something better, just didn't know it yet. Silence settled comfortable between them, the kind that came from people who'd learned to be quiet together, without it feeling like absence. Then Elena spoke again, voice soft. Dylan asked me yesterday what I should be called. Not Ms. Cross, not Elena. Something that means family, without pretending to replace anyone. Marcus's breath caught. What did you say? That we'd figure it out together. That names matter less than showing up. That he could call me Elena until he was ready to call me something else. And what did he say? That he'd think about it. That right now Elena felt right, but maybe later it would be different. She paused. He's a smart kid. He learned from the best. They stood there as the city lights blurred into watercolor beyond their window. Two people who'd started with a contract and built something that couldn't be written into clauses or measured in weeks. Something that required faith rather than documentation. Trust instead of guarantees. In the morning, Elena would go to Crosstech and make decisions that moved money and changed trajectories. Marcus would oversee facility operations and solve problems people didn't know they had. Dylan would go to school and be 8 years old in all the complicated ways that meant. But right now in this kitchen that smelled like cocoa and quiet victory, they were just 3 people who'd figured out that family wasn't about blood or paperwork or any of the official designations society used to determine who belonged to whom. Family was showing up, was standing in front of cameras to protect someone who wasn't yours yet, was teaching a kid that strength meant distributing weight, not carrying it alone, was choosing honesty over convenience even when convenience would be so much easier. Family was 10 minutes stretched into forever, one intentional day at a time. Marcus turned from the window, Elena's hand still in his, and felt the weight of everything that had led here, the rain. The cafe, the broken heel, the custody threats, the loading dock confrontation settle into foundation. Not perfect, not without cost, but solid, weight-bearing, built to last. I love you, he said, because sometimes simple truth was the only adequate response to complicated grace. Elena smiled, the expression carrying warmth that had nothing to do with kitchen lights. I love you too. Both of you. In his room, Dylan slept with his blue ribbon pinned to the bulletin board beside his bed. A kid who'd won something and knew exactly what made victory matter. Not the prize. The people who'd shown up to watch him earn it. The city beyond their window kept moving lights marking other stories in progress. Other families building their own versions of strong from whatever materials they'd been given. Portland, in autumn. The rain thinking about starting again. The river reflecting back every choice that led to this moment. Marcus kissed Elena there in the kitchen, gentle and certain tasting, like coffee and future, and all the promises that didn't need contracts because they'd been tested under pressure and held. When they pulled apart, she was smiling in the way that suggested happiness didn't need permission to exist. It just needed people brave enough to build space for it. We started by pretending for 10 minutes, Marcus said, remembering rain and desperation and a woman who'd crashed through his door asking for help she didn't know she'd given. We ended by building forever. Then we have the rest of our lives to get it right. That sounds perfect. They turned off the kitchen light, checked on Dylan one more time. Still sleeping, still safe, still theirs, and walked together toward a bedroom that belonged to both of them now. Tomorrow would bring new problems that needed solving, new challenges that required the kind of strength that came from knowing you didn't have to carry weight alone. But tonight was for rest, for trust, for the quiet certainty that sometimes the strongest structures were the ones built from honest work and patient days and the particular grace of people who chose each other, not because it was easy, but because it was worth the effort. in the dark wrapped around each other in ways that promised tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow after that. Marcus and Elena found the peace that came from no longer having to pretend. They'd earned this, survived this, built this from coffee beans and safety pins and the radical choice to treat people like they mattered. And in the morning, when Dylan crawled into bed between them, asking if it was Pancake Saturday, they'd say yes. Because some traditions were worth keeping, and some families were worth building, and the strongest cup was always the one you held together.